Welcome to Unbroken, the podcast. I'm Savannah Levins. I started this podcast because in my life experience and working as a news reporter, I found everyone's been knocked down or blindsided or had their world seemingly turned upside down at some point. And for many people, it's cathartic to talk about their experiences out loud. And likewise, it can be therapeutic to hear other people's stories and know that there is light at the end of all darkness. If you have a story you'd like to share on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Just email unbrokenthepodcast@gmail.com. And please rate, review, and subscribe. Today on the podcast, we have Nichelle. She was crowned Mrs. North Carolina in 2018. She used her platform to talk about something she says she was once ashamed to talk about, her battle with infertility and miscarriage. I so admire how far she's come in her journey and finding strength after so much pain. Here's Nichelle. Today on the podcast, I have Nichelle. Nichelle, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
On today's episode, we're talking about infertility, something that you struggled with a lot. Can you kind of take me back to the beginning of this story when you realized this was an issue for you?
Sure. So in 2013, I got married. And for me, I really wanted to start a family pretty quickly. I don't really know if that's exactly what my husband wanted, but that's okay. He was on board. So after about 6 months of trying, we went to our OBGYN, and I was diagnosed with PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, which affects about 10% of women. So with this disease, you don't ovulate. So it was very obvious at that point why we weren't getting pregnant. My doctor put me on a couple ovulation-inducing medications. One is Clomid, and one is Letrozole. And after the second month, I got pregnant. And so we thought, oh, wow, this wasn't bad at all. This was pretty easy. 8 months in, we're pregnant, happy, excited. And unfortunately, I miscarried that baby in January. So it was very upsetting, of course, very devastating, especially with your first pregnancy. You just have so much hope. You've already planned out their life. And at that point, we took a break, and then we were referred to a reproductive endocrinologist at the Women's Institute with Atrium Health. So over the course of 4 years, actually, I saw her, and we tried everything. We tried Letrozole, which is another ovulation-inducing drug. We tried intrauterine inseminations, so we did about 4 of those. We did IVF, which is kind of your last stop. And we felt like that was something that was a definite. But unfortunately, over those years of so many different treatments, so many different months, we still did not have a baby. And in total, we had 5 miscarriages. 3 of them they tested, and we had chromosomal issues, or the baby had chromosomal genetic issues. And so we figured that was why the pregnancy didn't last. But then with 2 of the pregnancies, we don't really know what happened. But in the meantime, I tried so many different things like yoga, acupuncture, there's fertility meditations, gluten-free, dairy-free diets. We really did a lot of kind of like the Eastern medicine types of things in conjunction with the fertility treatments. And so not knowing for so long was just a really difficult thing to deal with, of course. And, that's kind of, I could talk about it for days, but that's the condensed version of what happened over the last 6 years.
I can't imagine the shock and pain of going through a miscarriage once, let alone several times. What gave you the strength to keep pushing on it and keep trying? What gave you that drive?
I think once I started opening up and sharing with family and friends, we got so much support and love and just encouragement to keep trying, to keep going. The more I shared my story, the more other women would say, oh, well, I've been through this. And maybe it wasn't 5 miscarriages, but maybe they had 2 or even 3. And they would tell me how they came out on the other side with children. And pretty much to keep the faith and just try to keep in mind that this was a season, that maybe it was just God's timing. So I spoke to psychologists. I had, regular therapy appointments. I also went to infertility support groups here in Charlotte. and spoke to my pastor. So I feel like we had a lot of support to keep going after each roadblock.
Mm-hmm. Were you the kind of little girl who envisioned her life one day with a husband and several kids? Was that you as a young girl?
Absolutely. I was the young girl playing with dolls, Barbies, playing house. I couldn't wait to be married and have a family of my own. It was like I couldn't grow up fast enough. And it was just something I always knew was meant for me, like to be a mother.
Do you think that made it more difficult when it wasn't as easy as society makes it seem like it is?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think it's something that's just going to happen. A lot of people spend many years preventing pregnancy. So, of course, you think that when you're ready and you're married and it's time, that it's going to be something relatively easy. And even after getting pregnant so easily on the Clomid, we thought, oh, okay, well, we were able to get pregnant. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but a lot of people have a miscarriage. I think 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. Wow. So we didn't think that we would go through another 5 years of that. I mean, that was just something I never would have guessed would happen. So, yeah, absolutely. I think as women, we really put a lot of pressure on ourselves to become mothers. And it's almost like you get to a certain age, and if you're not a mom, then you're almost left out of like a whole social circle, or you can't relate to your friends as well anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself as a woman, and I think that was very different than how my husband was dealing with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you think maybe social norms as they are now played a factor in your struggle? Because I think, I mean, it's so common for people to say, when are you getting married and having babies? And,
right.
Oh, when are you guys going to have children? And I feel like that can be harmful for some people who are maybe struggling with this personally. What were some of the kind of societal issues that kind of played a hand in that?
Well, people will see that as soon as you get married, people start asking you when you're having kids. And I think it's a seemingly innocent question, but it's very hurtful if you're going through something on the back end that people don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, when people would ask that question, even though we were in the process of trying and maybe even going through treatments, I would always say, oh, we're not ready yet, or sometime soon, or I don't know. And it became harder actually to keep making something up than to just tell the truth about it. Mm-hmm. And once I came out with my whole story and platform as Mrs. North Carolina last year, mm-hmm. it was much easier to deal with those questions because I was able to just be completely transparent and say, this is what we've been through the past mm-hmm. 5 years, and we want children very badly, but it just hasn't happened yet. I felt like it was a weight lifted off my shoulders because you're right, society. And it doesn't, I've been told it doesn't stop there. Like you'll have one child and then people start asking when you're having a second. Or if you have a girl, people will ask you when you're having a boy. And I really wish these questions would stop because they really don't benefit anybody. I mean, the person who asked it is probably going to feel awkward if they get a negative response. Mm-hmm. And then the person who the question was asked to starts to feel bad, get in their head. Maybe they were having a good day. Now they're thrown off because someone brought it up in that sense. Mm-hmm. So,
and I definitely do want to talk about and go into that turning point for you, winning the Mrs. North Carolina title and becoming very public with this, the hashtag campaign. But before that, I want to talk about when you felt the need to hide it. Can you talk about that time in your life? Because there might be people listening who are relating to that, struggling with that, wanting to keep it internal for whatever reason. What were your reasons for that?
Sure. Well, I think especially after the first miscarriage, I felt embarrassed for whatever reason. I don't know why. I just felt like, oh, wow, I couldn't grow a child. I couldn't keep my own child. It was irrational. I mean, looking back, it was completely irrational to think that that was my fault or that somehow I was a bad person. But for whatever reason, I did, and so I hid it. I just didn't want anybody to know. And I think as the years passed, I still felt that same shame and started to feel like lesser of a woman in a way because it is supposed to be such a natural part of life that you reproduce, and it is easy for so many people. So I think because I was hiding it, that led to more hiding and more isolation. And once you've told people one story, then you can't go back and tell them something different. So it just, I think it was more the shame, the embarrassment, and the stigma, actually. There's, to me, a lot of stigma attached with infertility.
Yeah. So talk to me about when you kind of had a shift in that mindset and decided to be more public, be more open about these struggles.
Well, really, it was when I won Mrs. North Carolina in 2018. And that, to me, each pageant winner or state winner is supposed to have a platform. And I felt called, really, by God, by everything, to get this story out now, even though I wasn't successfully a parent yet. I still felt like there was so much meaning in sharing the story while you're still in the middle of it, because I think the whole 5-6 years, I was telling my husband, I am going to share my story. It's just going to be after we have kids and after everything is resolved. And in that moment, I knew that with the platform I would have and the exposure, especially since being a pageant winner is about empowering other women, it was crucial to me to start speaking about it publicly, to put a face and a voice to it, to let people know that it's okay to talk about it, that you don't have to be in hiding, because I think your emotions are just, they're all over the place. And if there's no one you can share it with, then it's just all bottled up inside and it gets worse. So at that point, I knew that I had to really start talking about it, and which was scary.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say, how were you expecting people to respond to that?
I honestly didn't know how people would respond. I felt like part of me was saying, even though I knew I wasn't perfect, it was that feeling of, oh, wow, now people know our deepest, darkest secret, and they know that we're not perfect and we don't have this perfect marriage. So that was frightening, and just wondering if I was going to open myself up to a bunch of random suggestions.
Yes.
The advice of go on a vacation, stop thinking about it. We've been on tons of vacations. So that's not the case. And the thing was, we had gotten pregnant naturally as well in those 5 years. So we knew that it could happen. We just weren't keeping any of the pregnancies. That was the main issue, really. And so when people kept saying, well, it'll happen when you least expect it, it had. 2 different times, it was when we least expected it, because we weren't doing fertility treatments, but it still didn't work out. So I didn't know if I was opening myself up to that. And also I just didn't know. But honestly, it was the exact opposite. People were so caring, so loving. Even to this day, people still reach out on a weekly basis asking for my advice on how to speak to a friend that's going through infertility, or telling me they had a coworker who just had a miscarriage and what should they say, what should they do. So in the end, it was, I feel like, the best thing I could have done. It's been very therapeutic for us as a couple as well to start sharing.
Yeah. And you touched on what was going to be my next question, is a lot of people maybe listening know someone who has gone through or is going through infertility, miscarriage, something like that, and it is very difficult, I feel like, to talk about it as someone who's never experienced it, to be sensitive, I guess, but not tiptoe either.
Right.
How would you suggest that people talk to their loved ones who are going through something like this?
I would say gauge what the person wants to talk about. So if somebody likes to talk about it or needs to get something off their chest, then be there for them in a listening form. I wouldn't say necessarily that you need to make a whole bunch of suggestions, because, like I said, we tried everything in the book. It's like, you name it, we tried it. So it's not necessarily that you're there to solve the problem, but you're there to acknowledge it and listen. And I found it helpful when people would reach out, either phone call, text, email, whatever, and say, I'm just thinking about you, or hope you're having a good day. My thoughts are with you. Just something that lets them know that you're there, I think is the nice thing. You can send a card. If somebody has a miscarriage, I mean, treat it like a death. It is, really. It is a death for those experiencing it. So send a card, send flowers, send candy. I don't know, but whatever you would do when someone loses someone that's very close to them, I would say treat it the same way. And as far as the sensitivity, don't ask invasive questions.
Yeah. Tell me about hashtag Start Asking.
Yeah, so that, again, was born out of the whole Mrs. North Carolina experience. We all have a platform. I decided that hashtag Start Asking would be mine because I'm encouraging young women in their 20s and early 30s to get fertility assessments. I think it's something that right now in the medical field, we're very reactive to fertility problems versus proactive. So until you've tried for a year, if you're less than 35, or if you've tried for 6 months and you're over 35, then likely you won't get any type of assessment done. So it's really something that we need to bring as women. We need to advocate for ourselves and bring that to our doctors and say, I'd like to have the blood test, because they can check things like ovarian reserve. They can see if you're in an early menopause, for instance. They can look at egg quality, look at your uterus and see if there's any obstructions, see if your fallopian tubes are open. So these are simple tests that can be done. And if you get them done earlier, before you're ready to have children, then you can make a choice, whether that's egg freezing, egg banking, or whatever you need to do. But at least you have that knowledge and that education before finding out at 40 that, oh my goodness, something's wrong and now it's too late.
I imagine that could be scary for some people to do, though. A lot of times with medical things like that, some people say, I would rather not know because I can't imagine if it comes back that I do have an issue.
Right.
What would you say to those people who are just maybe too scared?
Well, I would say, wouldn't you rather know now? I mean, I know it's scary and it's easier to just bury your head in the sand and say, oh, I'll be fine because I get a period every month. But it's just not true. Like, I was getting a period every month. It didn't mean anything in the long run. So I think women, we falsely think sometimes that everything's okay. Or we're on the pill. I was on the pill for several years, and that masks symptoms a lot of times, like endometriosis or things like that. So I would just say, wouldn't you rather know now when you could actually make a change or prevent something versus waiting until it's too late? Because then you'll have regrets. I just don't want anybody to have regrets. And much like we get our blood pressure checked, I mean, we get so many other things routinely checked. Why not our fertility health?
Some people who may be listening who are in the depths of their despair over this, whereas that's kind of where you started, after the first miscarriage. It's a dark place. You don't know what the heck to do. You're searching for help for anything, versus where you are now seems like you're in a very great place, and advocacy and all of that. How did you get there? I mean, I'm sure it was a lot. You've mentioned it was a lot of different things, but was there any particular thing or couple things that helped you out the most to kind of get to the point where you are now?
Well, I would say working with a therapist, because she was the one who suggested that I seek out the infertility support groups in Charlotte. And there's a few. There's Resolve. You've got Fertility for Colored Girls. There's also Moms in the Making. So those were 3 that I started attending. And I made some lifelong friends in those groups. And we still text each other and, communicate and see each other quite a bit. So I feel like the support is the biggest thing, just having those people that understand, that get it. And sometimes family and friends, while well-meaning, they don't get it because they haven't been through it. So why not be around a group of other women who are in the trenches now, and you all can support each other and cheer for each other and be there when someone needs to cry.
Yeah. What's the current status of your journey?
So the current status, I'm ecstatic to say that I'm now almost 27 weeks pregnant with a baby boy.
Congratulations.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
How do you feel now about it after everything you've been through?
I feel like I was on this path for a reason, and I think it was to be an advocate in this community. because a lot of times we become advocates or we become very interested in things that have personally affected us. And I can't say that if I had not been through this, I don't think I would be some type of infertility advocate.
Right.
Personally, I think it was destined to be. And it helps me not be as angry about the whole situation, because I just think for so long I was, why me? Woe is me. Nobody else deals with this. My life is ruined. So it's just so nice to turn that pain into something positive that can help other people, other couples who are suffering.
It is actually very rare to see someone being so open about this and advocating for it, whereas when you look at the statistics and how common it is, it's incredible that more people aren't talking about it.
Oh, I know.
Do you see that in society, that this is way more common than people could imagine?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of studies say 1 in 8 couples, some say 1 in 6 are now dealing with infertility. And I think as society continues the way it is, where millennials, we're getting married later, we're starting families later, we're having careers first, it's gonna be there, unfortunately. And I think the sooner we can all rally together and try to help each other and lift each other up, the better, because unfortunately this keeps getting worse by the year.
And do you think the hush-hush tendencies about this topic make people going through it feel more like pariahs in their pain?
I do. I really do. For some reason, like I said, that stigma is still there. And a lot of people, they're not comfortable sharing until you share. So like I'll open up the conversation and then they'll start telling me about their current situation. But I feel like if I had never said anything, then they wouldn't have. And so we all just would have been suffering in silence, not realizing that we were going through the same thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that perpetuates more isolation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how much therapy helped you. Mm-hmm. Was there anything in particular that came from those therapy sessions that really helped you shift your mindset? I ask for the people listening right now who maybe are going through something like this, who need a little bit of help.
I think one of the things that my therapist said was, it's not all of you. This is a part of you. A part of you is trying to become a parent. A part of you really wants to be a mom, but it's not everything. And I think for so long I was putting too many things on hold, like even doing the Mrs. North Carolina pageant, because, I'll be doing a fertility treatment, or, I might be pregnant. And truthfully, I competed in the pageant 2 months after my final miscarriage. Wow. And I thought about dropping out. But at that point, I said, no, I've committed to this. I want to do this. And I can't continue to put my life on hold. So I would say that was one huge thing, to realize that it was a part of me. And then also to keep living. So keep planning vacations, keep having fun with your friends, do that pageant or whatever it is that you might not be able to do if you did have kids, for instance. Maybe go and do those adventures and take advantage of that time. Because really, in the meantime, my husband and I were able to get even closer, and we had like that extra 6 years of just us two, whereas we wouldn't have had that, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say just try to find the silver lining and please continue to live your life, because I talk to women all the time who have just put everything on hold because of infertility. Mm-hmm. So continue living.
If there are couples listening dealing with infertility, we've given a lot of advice to the women going through it. What about their spouses? I mean, was there anything that in particular that your husband did or didn't do in this process that you could advise?
Sure. I think I used to get mad at him sometimes, because at least for the first few years, I felt like he wasn't as affected by it as I was. And I think, again, that's part of society. So he would go out with the guys or go to lunch with guys, and they're not talking about kids. They're not talking about pregnancy or, when are you guys going to start a family? It's just, I feel like men have just different conversations. Yeah. And so with the conversations that I was in for all those years about someone's child or pregnancy or getting married, I feel like I was just experiencing the brunt of having to hear about it all the time, and he wasn't.
Yeah. Harder for you to escape it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I felt like I couldn't escape it, and I felt like he could. I mean, so I was resentful about that. And I think that for him, he just, we both have a strong faith, but with his faith, he would just always say, it's going to happen, it's God's timing. And so I feel like he just didn't get as bogged down by it. And he was still able to look at all the good things that were happening in our lives. So, but a lot of women say that, who are going through this, that they feel like their husbands just don't get it. I did find a book that was really good called it's for men. It's called What to Expect When She's Not Expecting. Oh. So, and he read a little bit of it, but I would encourage, I was like, please read this book. And he's like, no, I don't need to think about it more than I already do. Yeah. But I really think that it was a great book. I read through it. I thought it had a lot of really good things in it for husbands or for spouses or anybody dealing with the other side.
Any final words before we wrap this up? Anything else you want to say?
I would just say to, for those going through this, to keep the faith, hope, and know that it can change at any point. I didn't realize at times that it could change, but when we went in for that back in December, we went in for that last embryo transfer, the last one that I was going to try, because actually we were going to choose a surrogate as our next step, because we had these frozen embryos left and we wanted to make sure that they had the best chance of coming to life. And so because we didn't know what was going on with me, we said this would be the last time that I tried it. And really that last frozen embryo transfer, for whatever reason, lots of different reasons, I think, took. And it just reminded me that 6 years can change like in an instant. Yeah. And so really just, I would encourage people not to give up, but also to be open to other options, because I got to a point where I was open to surrogacy. I said, I just want a healthy baby here, and I just want to be a parent. And so if that's surrogacy, if none of these embryos become babies, adoption, I just tried to open myself up to other ways. There's egg donors as well. So there's just so many options to become a parent.
Yeah. Nichelle, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so sorry for all your losses and the pain that you've been through, but I think it's such a testament to you as a woman, as taking that pain and turning it into advocacy and something so beautiful and so great. I think your words are going to help a lot of people. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
On the pregnancy now. I'm so happy for you. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to Unbroken, the podcast. We'll see you next time.